on the weekends, they would all get in other people's cars and they would drive up and down Jefferson, and they would stop at places like the Texas Theater and other theaters, and they would do mock holdups where they would go up with like holding their finger out like a gun or something, and the teller would give them a penny or something, and they would drive off.
Welcome to the Hidden City Podcast. I'm Grant.
And I'm Doug, and we're here to share some of the incredible stories and people from Oak Cliff that you might not know.
We're going to sit down with some of the visionaries, craftsmen, and business owners who have shaped Oak Cliff into what it is today.
Oak Cliff is on the south bank of the Trinity River, a few miles south of downtown Dallas. While technically it was part of Dallas, it was its own city for a long time, and it still has that independent spirit.
We'll dive into the history and the spirit of this place, exploring the different challenges and successes that defined it.
This is The Hidden City, a podcast about the people and the stories that make Oak Cliff extraordinary.
Well, welcome to this episode of the Hidden City Podcast. We have a very special guest with us today, Gayla Brooks. She is the co-author of Legendary Locals of Oak Cliff, as well as Images of America Oak Cliff. She was also the columnist for the Oak Cliff Advocate for about 5 years, wrote an Oak Cliff column there, and is kind of our Oak Cliff historian around here. So we're really excited to have Gail on the show.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, before we were recording even, we were jumping into stories, and so we wanted to get it going. But Gail, what kind of Oak Cliff stories do you want to start off with? I know we were kind of talking about Stevie Ray a little bit.
We can go to Stevie Ray if you want to, or we can go earlier, or whatever you guys want to do.
Well, you grew up here. Your sons were born here. Tell us your history, your family roots here.
Well, my dad was born over. It's mainly people call it Cement City now.
Yep.
But it was called Eagle Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time, it wasn't a part of Dallas. And that's why I couldn't find their information in the old city directories, because they weren't incorporated into the city at that time.
That's like Singleton area now?
Yes.
Would that be kind of
where the cement plants were. Yeah.
Okay.
He was born there in Eagle Ford, which now, of course, has been incorporated into Dallas. And I was born at Methodist Hospital. My 3 children were born at Methodist Hospital, and I went to school here and graduated from here and lived here. I lived in Oak Cliff until my late 20s, except for when I was in college. I was, in the dorm, a couple of places, but other than that, I've lived here. So I grew up with it as Oak Cliff expanded, especially after the war. When everybody came back from the war, there was a huge expansion. Everybody was having children. I'm at the very first of the baby boomers.
There you go.
So do the math.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about kind of after the war and the expansion that was taking place in Oak Cliff. What was life like here in Oak Cliff?
It seemed that most of the military personnel returned to Oak Cliff that were Cliffites before. Their roots were so deep. The way things were set up back then, originally, Oak Cliff only had one high school, and that was Oak Cliff High School. And then it was changed when Mr. Adamson, the principal, passed away. It then became Adamson. But before that, I believe in 1925, I think Sunset opened. Yeah. And believe it or not, I think Mr. Adamson was the principal at both schools for the first year. I think part of it was because everybody loved going to Oak Cliff High School, and they all loved Mr. Adamson. And their brother, their sister, their aunt, their uncle, their next, everybody they knew had gone there. And because it was such a tight-knit community, all those students that were getting transferred to the new school, Sunset, didn't want to go there. They wanted to go to Adamson.
Oh, interesting.
So
He had a profound impact on people.
He did. People really loved him. He was very popular. So when that happened, everybody that was sort of forced to go to Sunset, like I said, all of their neighbors, their big sister, their aunt, their cousin, whatever, they had all gone to Oak Cliff High School.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so what happened is, therefore, until South Oak Cliff was built in, I think, 57 or something like that, everybody in Oak Cliff knew everybody else because they all went to school together originally, and then they broke off, but they all still knew each other.
They grew up together.
They
in this
did.
Area.
And they dated back and forth.
Yeah.
And I think if I remember what my mom told me correctly was that every Friday there was a dance at one of the two schools.
Oh, wow, that's
and
pretty
so
frequent.
everybody wanted to go to the dance, so they would just
whichever
go
one.
over.
That's awesome. I mean, that definitely feels like Oak Cliff is still, even today, like it feels like its own like community or its neighborhood of sorts. And so hearing that, it like very much they shared the schools. They would all know each other.
They
It was
did.
all-
They
yeah.
did. And another thing too another thing they did was they had they weren't supposed to, but they had sort of sororities and fraternities. They were clubs,
Yeah.
and you weren't supposed to do
Yeah,
it, but
yeah.
everybody did. And I know my mother was a member of one, and my dad was a member of one, and all of those people, they all intermarried and had children, and then they all sort of stayed in Oak Cliff. So therefore, I went to school all the way through school with some of my parents' friends'
Wow.
children.
Wow.
So
Yeah, it's
Some
tight-
deep
tight-knit.
roots
Yeah.
too. Yeah, I love that.
I also, that's funny hearing the clubs and like groups thing too, because I feel like that was something that happened a lot in the 50s when I was reading about some of the Elmwood history, even our neighborhood here. It's like there's a Dad's Improvement League, and there's all these like kind of clubs of sorts, or people that have like kind of brought together in groups and stuff. And so that's just interesting.
Well,
hearing,
it was a big deal, and I mean, they had rush parties and all that, and they elected
Seriously?
officers.
Yeah. Huh.
And the thing that amazed me the most was, I don't know where they got the money. It was during the
Yeah.
Depression,
Yeah.
but they had dances.
Yeah.
And they would sponsor like at the Baker Hotel, the ballroom.
Oh, yeah.
And I should have asked I asked my parents a lot, but I never asked them the particulars on that. But I have a lot of the old clippings, and it
Wow.
was amazing. They would one of the stories you guys probably would enjoy the most was unbelievable. But back during the Depression, nobody had any money. I mean, nobody had any money, especially if
Yeah.
you lived in the city.
Yeah.
You were doing well to get enough to eat. If you were on a farm, you could grow something. Anyway, my mom told me that on the weekends they would all get in other people's cars, and they would drive up and down Jefferson, and they would stop at places like the Texas Theater and other theaters, and they would do mock holdups where they would go up with like holding their finger
goodness.
out like a gun or something, and the teller would give them a penny or something, and they would drive off.
just to play around. And wow, oh my
Mock
goodness.
holdups, and they get a penny for it. So there was a little participation on both sides.
yeah. That's funny.
Yeah,
Wait, how interesting.
and my dad might have told me a few stories that weren't correct, but my mom wouldn't have. No, she wouldn't.
Oh, that's great.
My mom wouldn't have made it up.
Yeah, Jefferson seems like one of those places that we've always just admired and loved, and we think it's one of the best streets in
No,
Dallas.
y'all don't even know.
And we don't even know.
You
We
don't even know what it was
I know.
like back during
Tell us. Like, I want to know.
Well, one of the things I found out about Jefferson was that at the time that it was at its epicenter, it was the longest, most heavily used shopping street outside of a downtown area in the United States.
Wow.
Seriously.
I could see it. If it's just totally activated all the way down like that, there's definitely, it seems like a renaissance that it can occur. Because I think I'm laughing. We don't even know. Like it's like
We've
totally,
only heard stories,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah.
like the boulevard. I mean, it's laid out so well
Yeah.
that you can sort of visualize it when you drive down. You're like,
Yeah.
just imagine what it would be like. But of course, you got to see a lot of like
I did.
And
what it
what
was.
was that? Yeah, what was that like? I mean, I know there's so many stories about the theater and different shops throughout, but yeah, I'm curious.
Oh
if you
yeah,
could
they were.
describe
It was a big deal. Of course, that was before Wynnewood was built.
Yeah.
Wynnewood Shopping Center was built. It changed the Jefferson dynamic.
Oh,
So
interesting.
until that time, it was especially on Saturdays. Holy tamale! It was
The
full.
place to be.
It was.
Yeah.
It was, and I mean, there were certain stores there that are no longer there.
Yeah.
But I could name all the stores, and then of course the big one was going to the Sears store, and
Sears
that was an
store.
event. And anybody that lived back then, people that I know,
Yeah.
they'll tell you that it was a big deal because the candy department was downstairs, and the
candy department on Jefferson. What? Keep going.
you went downstairs, and the person that was working there, you would tell them you wanted a nickel's worth or a dime's worth of candy, and they would scoop it out and put it in a little scale,
Oh wow, yeah.
and then they would pick up that little part, and they would put it into a paper bag and fold it over the top, and you get a dime's worth of corn candy or a nickel's worth of corn candy. And yeah, all my crazy Oak Cliff Boomer friends would tell you they all remember that.
That's awesome.
And then going there at Christmas, they decorated the windows and had a lot of the animated figures.
That's
and
awesome.
it was a big deal. And then there was the fire prevention parade where Miss Oak Cliff, Miss Flame, she was on the
Flame.
Wait, tell us about Miss
we don't
Flame. We don't
You're
know anything
talking
about
to
Miss
people who've
Flame.
only been here for a while, so
I think there's a photo of it. I think in the Oak Cliff, the images book.
Okay.
I think there's a picture of one of the Miss Flames, and she's in the convertible, and they're going down the street.
Wow.
I even have home movies of me and all the other girls in the drill teams and the cheerleaders in the parade coming up the street. It's
Wow.
It's
I
crazy.
love it so much.
That's
And
awesome.
everybody went. It was just a really big deal.
Well, you were mentioning this before we started the episode, but you were there, not to change subjects completely, but when JFK visited Dallas.
Yes.
Can you tell us that story? Because obviously that's a huge part of Oak Cliff's history with Lee Harvey Oswald.
Right. The way things were set up then was if you had a note from your parents, you could get out of school certain hours. I'm guessing it was probably from 9:30 or maybe 10 until 2:30 or something like that. And so Mom agreed to let me borrow the car. Back then, kids did not have cars. They didn't even think about having cars.
It wasn't even an option.
It was not. It was not on our radar screen. So Mom let me have the car, and I drove over to Sunset and picked up my boyfriend, and who also had a note from his parents.
Okay,
he
all right.
could go.
Awesome.
Good coordination.
And so we did. So we went over, went downtown and parked and waited, and the parade started, and the president and first lady and governor and Mrs. Connolly came by, and we all said hello.
So you got to see him, wave to him?
It was.
What was the energy like? What do you remember?
Well, it was just, I was 16.
Yeah.
It was just, but anyway, the president, and she looked, very, very beautiful with that beautiful pink suit that she had. And it was kind of, it was like, wow, this
is wild that you're seeing this.
It was kind of crazy, yeah. And then we decided to go inside one of the department stores that had a little cafe there. And we went in and had lunch and then came back out. And that was before the days of cell phones and all that. So we just got in our car and started driving home, and we were going across the Oak Cliff Viaduct, turned on the radio, and that's when we found out what had happened.
Oh, my goodness.
So, like I said, without the kind of communications that we have today, it was just a different story.
Wow. Oh, man.
That's wild.
That's a wild story.
Yeah. And I think one of the things, too, is like Grant was saying earlier, it's obviously there's the connection with Lee Harvey, and then even being at the Texas Theater on Jefferson too. Can you share some of that connection story for?
Well, I do know this. I know that the students that did not go to the parade, and not everybody went. Of course, but the students that were at Adamson High School, they heard the shots when Officer Tippett was murdered.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, then Oswald was captured at the Texas Theater, and actually to Officer Tippett, the last phone call that he made was from Top 10 Records.
Seriously,
that's right. I have heard this. Yeah.
Yes, and the man that owned Top 10 at the time, he still had the phone there.
I was going to say, I think they still have the phone. I don't know if it's gone now, but
I don't know. But I went in there and talked to him. We took my son, who does, both of my sons do a lot of photography.
Nice.
I took my son with me. He took a lot of photos of the inside and the phone and everything.
Wow.
And that's where he made his last phone call. And I actually, Officer Tippett's son, Alan, went to my high school.
Okay.
He might have been in the 9th grade in junior high school at that time. But I got to know him later on, and actually got to visit with Mrs. Tippett when they put the ceremony when they put the plaque up. I was a guest there, and I got to talk with Mrs. Tippett, and then I went to Alan's funeral and got to visit with Mrs. Tippett again. She was a lovely lady.
Wow.
A lovely lady, yeah.
What was that effect like for Oak Cliff? Obviously there was an effect in Dallas, but you're saying Oak Cliff was such a tight-knit community, and already just hearing you're like, oh, I went to school with this person and this person. Like, do you remember that effect?
I just remember, of course, that it was on the news everywhere. And
Everywhere.
again, that was
Yeah.
back before
Yeah.
the communications that we have there. I remember we went to, I think it was actually we went to the El Phoenix restaurant that
Yeah.
was there,
Yeah.
you know, on Colorado, which we went for so many years. And a lot of the restaurants had brought in televisions. So if you were waiting to be seated or whatever, or waiting to check out, they had the televisions on. So that was... So, of course, a lot happened in a very short period of time.
That's right.
You had the assassination, you had the new president sworn in, and then you had
Jack Ruby killing Oswald.
And
Sorry, keep going. Yeah, there's just a lot really back to back.
It was like a lot going on,
all
and that was back
unfolding.
today. I think people are more used to the nonstop news because we get it 24/7. But back then it was a slower pace, and you weren't used to an onslaught, an avalanche of news.
Yeah.
And there was so much happening, and of course they were over in Irving going through his house and talking to the guy who rode his carpool guy.
Yeah.
Everyone's talking to everyone.
Yeah, and I was 16 and
yeah.
I had a boyfriend and I was,
You were just
You're like,
you're just living through this amazing moment in time.
Yeah. As an adult, I'm sure it would have been different.
Sure.
But like I said, I had schoolwork to do and dates to go on.
That's right.
Well, you've helped write both of these books. And I'm curious. We're talking about some of the big figures. We've got Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, Bonnie and Clyde is another name that gets thrown around.
Cement City.
And, Bonnie was Bonnie from Cement City?
Yeah, she was born there.
Okay.
And my dad told me that she was born several houses down from him. I'm not sure. That's why I was trying to find their listings in the city directories, but because they were outside of the city limits, they weren't listed. So I don't know.
Well, and the Barrow Station was there up until did they get torn down? I think.
I hope not.
I thought I remember seeing something about that.
Yeah,
we should
but
look
I
after
remember
this,
I remember going and seeing it.
Yeah.
because it's right on Singleton.
It is.
Yeah, but that whole area. So Bonnie and Clyde, that's like a really big historical.
Well, you inevitably hear these names if you're in Oak Cliff, and you know Stevie Ray Vaughan's another one, and that we should definitely talk about him. But I'm kind of curious: are there any stories or historical figures in Oak Cliff that you don't think maybe get as much attention, but are kind of an interesting one that you discovered either in the process of writing these books, or one that you think people should know more about? Today's show is brought to you by Oak Cliff Brewing Co. Are you interested in unwinding and connecting with neighbors over a great beer? Then go visit Oak Cliff Brewing Co. They've got a great tap room with all sorts of great beers on tap. It's a full production brewery here in the heart of Oak Cliff. Visit oakcliffbrewing.com to find out what's on tap right now and where you can find fresh beer made right here in Oak Cliff.
There were several people whose stories they're telling me their stories, and inside you're going, no.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you're like, I know it's not true.
Kid. But one of the people who I loved writing about and researching, and we are now friends, is Jerry Rome.
Okay.
And Jerry was the runner-up for the Heisman Trophy, and in my opinion, should have won it. It was the closest vote to date.
Really?
Yes,
is that right?
To that date, yeah. And I think the reason, the conventional wisdom sort of is that the person that did win it was because he was a QB at Notre Dame, and Jerry was at the University of Tulsa. But Jerry set so many records that it's been so long since I have done all this, and there's so many things going through my head.
Yeah.
I hate to try to quote figures, but
that's okay.
The amount of records that he set,
it's unbelievable. I'm sure.
That's what I was going.
Yeah.
There's no way.
No, but it was.
But he really did.
And one of the funniest stories that came out of that was Jerry would do everything hard copy.
Yeah.
I would do it on my computer and send it to him. He'd print it out and make all these changes. And he kept crossing out one of the awards. And so finally, I was on the phone and I asked him why. And he said, well, I didn't win that award. He says, I know. It was a Sammy Baugh Award, I believe.
Okay.
And he said, it was from, I believe, the Touchdown Club of Cincinnati gave out the Jerry Baugh Award. Is that right? Tommy Baugh?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Anyway. And I said, okay, wait a minute. So I pulled up the website and I said, okay, Coach. That's what he is. He
went
everyone
by
called.
Coach.
He
Yeah.
goes by Coach. I said, look, Coach, I'm looking at this thing. and it's showing all the winners of this award. And I'm down to 1964. And guess whose name is on there? Yours. And he went, no. When I said yes, he said, well, I didn't know anything about it. So
He didn't even know he won the award.
so I was able to get him in contact with the person who's currently the president of that organization.
Wow.
And I believe in 2011, he actually went to their awards banquet and got his award from 1964.
Wow.
I believe it was 2011. So
Oh, wow.
that was one of the fun stories.
Oh, that's a cool
He should
story.
have won the Heisman.
He should
I
have.
mean, Notre Dame's overrated.
Always has been.
Always has.
Always
Well,
has been.
if you go in and I don't know how it's this book that I featured him more.
Okay.
And a lot of it is in there.
Cool.
And I don't know how many of the records are still standing, but he went on to play for the Cowboys.
That's awesome.
And several other teams. And then he was a coach. He still does some private coaching the last time I talked to him. And anyway, he let me put on. He won a Super Bowl ring as a coach
awesome.
for the Redskins. So I got to put on his ring and take a photo. So
Hey, that's
that
pretty
was
cool.
fun.
I bet you uncovered so many interesting
Well, that was one of
stories
the
over
fun
the years.
stories, yes. And then the other one was crazy. It's about Benny Binion and Herbert Noble.
Benny Binion.
Do you know those names?
No,
I don't. Yeah.
Well, Benny Binion was one of the early people that went out to develop Las Vegas.
Okay.
Oh,
And
okay.
he was, you can imagine, And so it's I did
You can
want
imagine Grant.
What does that mean? Huh? You can imagine.
She looked at you.
Oh, come on. What are you implying, Doug?
his sweet little face.
Thank
know.
you. I can imagine. Really, Doug? All right, whatever.
Well, I think Oak Cliff too. Jumping a little bit into this, like it was early on. Didn't it have like a whole entertainment kind of like?
Well, I didn't
like-
know about all this because obviously it was before me.
Yeah.
But people think that I know all this information.
No, it was even
Yeah.
before.
Well,
yeah.
here's the deal: is I do know a lot, okay?
Yeah.
But a lot of it, I just know the basis,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
and so I have my people.
There you go.
Ah, okay.
And before I would do a lot of my stories, I would send out APBs to my people,
Yeah.
and they didn't always know. But again, like Oak Cliff, they knew somebody that knew.
Yes,
There was
you
a
have
connection.
network.
Yes,
Yeah,
and
that's
so
smart.
I could find somebody. Well, one of the real fears that I always had when I wrote the column was that I would write something that was incorrect.
Yeah.
Yeah, sure. Well,
Even if it
you're
was-
trying to tell history.
It is,
Yeah.
and even if it was good, I didn't
Yeah.
want. I wanted to be accurate. So therefore, I would always send out the column to whoever helped me or gave me the information and say, "Is all of this correct?"
That's
Whatever.
Oh, that's great. Okay, we're weaving, but we're going back to Benny. What was it?
Well, Benny Binion,
Yeah.
he moved to Las Vegas eventually, but he and Herbert Noble had a thing going, and Herbert lived in Oak Cliff, and typical of the mothers of the mothers and grandmothers
Yeah,
of my generation.
yeah.
What I found out was that it had to have been Benny, but they rigged the car, Herbert Noble's car, to explode when he went out and turned the ignition on. And unfortunately, that day he and his wife switched cars, and so his wife was killed. And from what I read, I mean, it was
Yeah.
extremely bad.
Oh,
And,
my goodness.
What I realized when I was looking at the address, it was 2 streets over on the same block as where my grandmother and my mother lived, and my
Wow.
grandmother grew up. So I'm sure that they were well aware of what happened.
Of that
but of course,
situation.
they never
Never said anything.
they never said
Yeah.
anything to me about it because you protected children and
Yeah. Oh,
you
sure,
didn't
yeah.
know. So that I thought, well,
Wow,
My
what
goodness,
what a
that's
wild
right.
story. Okay, and you said they were going out to Vegas, or they were.
well, Benny Binion was in Vegas. In
Okay.
fact, his son took over their operations, and there was a daughter, and there was a lot of
Yeah.
conflictions.
Yeah.
And one got convicted of something, and
Yeah.
it's one of the you'd have to.
A little bit of shady business or some
There's
sort
more
of.
than a little bit,
Just a little bit, probably.
but I thought that was just really interesting. I think Herbert Noble, he was in a gun in downtown Dallas. They were trying to kill him. You'd have to read all this or
It's
go
like
do
it's
your own,
history that you can almost not believe because it's so crazy.
because you're looking at it and you're going, he lived around the corner from my grandmother.
yeah. That's funny. Oh man.
So another person that was not in the book, but that I met afterwards, I was eating having lunch in Duncanville at a deli there, and I got a note that someone had called the deli and asked them to pass to me. I guess because they saw my book in their little book nook there.
Oh, cool.
And it was I recognized the name because I remember my parents talking about this person, but I'd never met them. And to cut to the chase, his name is Dr. A.D. Campbell Jr. And he was born in Oak Cliff and lived here until, I don't remember, 3rd grade or something like that. And then his parents opened a funeral home over in East Dallas, South Dallas now, I guess you call it now.
Okay.
And over off of MLK. And his mother, they did the funeral for Bonnie Parker.
Oh, wow.
Yes, his mother was, Dr. Campbell's mother was the mortician that
Seriously?
that cleaned her up and did the things that were necessary for the
And
service.
It was a pretty gruesome way to go too from
It was
the history. Oh
brutal.
my
Well,
goodness.
And it's like one separation of, I mean, it's just like, that's a really close
Yeah.
connection in time.
Yeah, well,
With these kind of, we think Bonnie and Clyde is kind of just like,
Yeah.
oh, it's off.
Yeah.
No, that's like a direct connection there.
Well, another what had happened was Bonnie's brother. It sounds odd today, okay?
No,
yeah.
Funeral homes used to be open 24 hours a day.
Okay.
And they didn't have metal detectors because people didn't do crazy stuff back then. And you could go, and there was somebody there 24/7. And anyway, her brother hung out there with a lot of the people that worked there, and they just hung. It was the Depression,
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot to do, and so he knew that his sister was going to get caught, and they were not going to give up. It was going to be bad, and so Dr. Campbell's dad took Bonnie's brother, and they went and visited Mrs. Parker, and got permission from Mrs. Parker that when Bonnie was captured, it probably was going to, not go well, that it would be better to plan something in advance than all of the media scrutiny that was going to be going on and everything. So she gave Dr. Campbell's father a letter from her. And so when Bonnie and Clyde were ambushed in Louisiana, Dr. Campbell's dad and Bonnie's brother went to Louisiana and gave that letter to the sheriff there, and the body was released to them.
Oh my goodness.
So they prepared for that in a way.
And they saw it coming.
Wow.
So we've been talking a lot about some of the famous people who've either been here or lived here at one portion of time. Well, let's talk about Oak Cliff as a place, because it's right next to Dallas. It was its own place. I mean, hence the reason for this podcast in some ways. Tell us a little bit about the history of Oak Cliff as it relates to Dallas from your perspective and what you've studied over the years.
I think we touched on earlier how so many people in Oak Cliff all knew each other. Another reason for that was because on Sundays, a lot of the families that had moved even out to the suburbs, they would come in to go to church together. So therefore, you were in Sunday school or church or youth group or choir or whatever with people that went to all the different schools. You'd be in your own neighborhood. Yes, and so they would come back together. And that went on for a very long time, And because of that, Oak Cliff, another thing about Oak Cliff was, let's take, for instance, just my high school. We had people there who came from families that were pretty affluent. Maybe not Highland Park affluent, but they were affluent people. They had
Stevens Park, all of that. You're like, there's some really well-to-do families in places.
Well, and even the
in Oak
history
Cliff,
of Oak Cliff and Highland Park together is an interesting
It
thing.
is, how the guys split and went there. But there were some very affluent people that lived in Wynnewood North, and of course all around Kessler and Stevens, that area. There were also some very affluent people that lived in Glen Oaks and in Wynnewood Hills.
Mm-hmm.
At the same time, we went to school with people who lived in Wheatland. That rode the bus that had very little. And also there were people in my school besides the Wheatland kids, that kind of group, and there were people that lived over by Westmoreland that lived in these little small frame houses. And there were people that lived in I guess other areas, but we all went to school together, and we played football together, and we were in activities together, and nobody thought anything about it. It wasn't I mean, they would
Haves
spend the
versus
night with you.
have-nots. It's
Yeah,
like,
there
no,
wasn't.
we're all in this
Integrated.
community. Yeah, this
Yeah,
whole
it's
So,
community.
which I think was a lot different than North Dallas, where they were more, each of the different schools, some were extremely affluent, some were moderately affluent.
sure.
Whereas we all went together and did things together and had slumber parties and all the things that teenagers do
I love
with
that.
people. And it was so, therefore, there wasn't people weren't aware of the socioeconomic as much. It was just, and I think a lot of that it just stayed that way for a long time.
It does seem it's like baked into what Oak Cliff is. Even today, you see
Yeah.
it's multicultural.
Yeah.
There's so many different walks of life, and it's all together. It's not a very, you don't see those differences as closely as you do in other parts of the city.
really-
I
yeah.
think.
No,
And
it's really
it just
interesting
kind
how
of stayed that way. And
Okay.
as we talked about earlier, you had the huge era of Jefferson. Well, then when they built Wynnewood Shopping Center, which I actually watched them build it because
Yeah.
my house was just a few
Wow.
houses off of Illinois there.
Okay, yeah.
And I watched them build it. And when Wynnewood opened, of course, a lot of the hub of shopping kind of
moved even further south.
moved a little bit. And but people at that time, the main high schools were Adamson, Sunset, Kimball, and Carter, and South Oak Cliff. Roosevelt was built in, I think, 65, and Pinkston maybe just right before that. But the main Oak Cliff high schools,
Those,
of course,
yeah.
it was during segregation. So the white high schools, if you want to call it that, were those. And again, it was one of those things where some of the schools had different mixtures of the different socioeconomic groups, but there was a lot of everything there, and nobody thought anything about it. So I think that's one of the things that made us different.
Made you different. Yeah. And tell us more. What was Wynnewood Village like when it was coming online? And was it a place to hang out kind of like Jefferson was? Or was it, describe those early days as you're seeing that kind of start and grow.
Well, it was just the place to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it was
Really?
You had your shoe store and your this store and your this store, and there was an A&P grocery store there and a Skiller's, and those just like everybody went to Skiller's in that area for their school supplies, and everybody's mom went to the A&P, and it was there was a White's cafeteria there that was a big deal.
Really?
And
Okay.
Fred's Barbecue and the Wynnewood Delicatessen and Jan's Bakery. If you got a birthday cake, if you got a birthday cake from Jan's Bakery that your mom didn't make, that was hot stuff.
Yeah, you were having a good birthday.
It was probably the cakes were probably $3.99 or something.
Oh,
I
that's
bet
amazing.
probably, yeah.
Well, and Wynnewood's so interesting because it's obviously it's off the highway, and it is like it's a huge shopping center, and it's kind of going through a rebirth right now,
It is.
As well. And so new Target coming in, all this stuff, but I could see, I could see it being such a drain a little bit on Jefferson, or like it's like you're almost now having these two centers that are such hubs within Oak Cliff.
Well, the suburban growth happened. You know, people were moving, and they were still having children, and families were growing, and people's
a lot of growth.
The whoever the breadwinner was, they were earning more money, and you got a little bit better house, a little bit bigger house, that kind of a thing. And so a lot of the shopping shifted there, and it was just the place to be. I'm so sorry they tore down the Wynnewood Theatre. It was that was a really good. That was
horrible.
A great deal. Yeah.
Oh, I mean, there was rumors before COVID that they were going to put another theater in there. I think it was
Aztec Theater or something like that.
Yeah,
those kind of died down.
That would have been fun to see.
Yeah.
But no, so that's interesting. I actually didn't know there was a theater in Wynnewood. Okay.
And it was a nice theater too. And
cool.
I know y'all have heard these stories before, but our mothers would take. I mean, when we were 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, our parents would drive us up to the theater on Saturdays and drop us off and give us $1, maybe $1.25 if it was payday or whatever the case may be.
Awesome.
And that would get you in and get you a hot dog and popcorn and a Coke and
you hang out.
A pickle, and you still have a dime to call home for your mom to come pick you up.
That's a weekend. That's amazing.
I think Otto needs to be dropped off over in Wynnewood with $1 in his pocket. Not yet. One day maybe. But,
that's funny.
It's hard to believe, but it's really true. It is.
Oh, that's special.
Special. You almost wish you could reclaim that kind of stuff because
it was so innocent. I mean, it was like growing up in Oak Cliff. really was like Leave It to Beaver.
Was it really?
It really
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
Now, and also too, it was a lot like Happy Days, the show Happy Days.
Yeah.
I was more of a kid during the Happy
During that
Days
time,
era.
sure. Yeah.
But it was the cars and the, it was
It had that culture of sorts.
It was so
yeah.
fun. It was so innocent. It was just one of the other stories, going back to Coach Rome, he told me in this one, he assured me it was true. He said that after football season was over, that he and his football buddies would go down to the end of the runway at Redbird Airport
Yeah, sure.
with their BB guns.
Yeah, they would.
And shoot birds. And he said the guys in the control tower would wave because they knew they were. And can you imagine that
No.
today?
Anybody being anywhere near an airport runway with a gun?
With a
I'm
BB
sorry,
gun.
probably not happening.
The FBI would be there in
No kidding.
90 seconds.
Yeah.
So it was just and like the
Yeah.
robberies on the mock robberies on Jefferson. It was just a.
Oh,
Just a
that I
different-
see what you're saying. There's an innocence, like even just the joking of like, okay,
Yeah.
we have no money, give it to us. Yeah,
It's a different era. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
well,
that's
I mean, it's
wild.
interesting to think about different eras in Oak Cliff because we're talking about the 50s and then we're talking
Yeah.
about, later in the 80s, 90s. It's gone through these really, I think, distinct periods of time.
Yeah.
I'm curious from your perspective what you think of the, 100 years from now or maybe less than that. What will people think about the time we're in Oak Cliff? What would you kind of categorize in the context of history?
Yeah.
What would you categorize like the, 2015s to 2030s so far?
Yeah.
This general time frame.
I have no idea.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I can't really answer that, I think, is because we have so much information now.
Yeah.
It's constant information.
Yeah.
It depends on how much you want to listen to.
Yeah.
And whereas the Civil War was a time when it wasn't a barrage of information. And so you remember that, you remember World War I and World War II, and you can go back to any event or whatever, the Revolution, the French Revolution, whatever. But now it's just a barrage of information.
Yeah.
And it probably, my guess is people will just go, oh, well, whatever. I
Yeah,
mean, I don't
you
know.
don't know.
Yeah,
it's
there's-
hard to tell.
There's
Yeah.
just so much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
that's
no,
interesting.
and I think, I mean, it seems there's definitely stages or eras of this neighborhood, and I think just hearing these stories from you, it's awesome.
Well,
I
the-
had no
there-
idea there's a candy store on Jefferson. That's kind of fun, Yeah.
Gayla, what got you interested in history in Oak Cliff like this? We haven't even asked that question yet, I don't think.
I think all of us have a bent.
Yeah.
We all have
Yeah.
something that we just kind of are drawn to. And I think that was something I did. My grandmother's house, the one I was telling you about, it is now underneath I-35.
Oh, wow.
Really?
She was
Okay.
she was one of those blocks that
Wow.
they went through.
They took it, yeah.
And
took it out.
what's crazy is that the two houses on either end of the block are still there.
Wow.
That is
So,
bizarre.
and at some point there'll be like a deck park, maybe not on that part of it, but yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's just like this whole other talking about contextualizing today. It's like there's these things that happen. So her house was taken out during that construction. That's wild.
Yeah. So there are a lot of things that just kind of got erased.
Yeah.
Sure.
What comes to mind from your recollection of things that got erased, like the Wynnewood Theatre? I think so many people, their minds would be blown to know that there was a theater in that shopping center. What comes to mind where you're like, man, I missed this. So this was great.
Probably Austin's Barbecue.
Yeah,
I've
I've
always
heard about
heard
Austin's
that,
barbecue
yes.
for
Yeah.
years.
Illinois and what is it? Illinois and Hampton? Or-
I think Hampton,
okay.
yeah.
Hampton, Illinois, that whole corner.
Was a thing. That's what I hear.
Hampton, Illinois is basically
Yeah.
where the school district boundaries of Kimball, Adamson, and Sunset all come
That's
together.
the four
Oh,
corners.
interesting. Okay, so that's an important
More or less.
little-
Yeah.
Yeah, if you lived on one side of Illinois, you went to one school, the other
Yeah.
side, and then vice versa. And then the Adamson kids were a little bit, but they were close enough to where that was sort of the epicenter there. And so there were a lot of things but yeah, Austin's Barbecue was there, and pretty much everybody went there. I mean, politicians, high school kids, families, everybody went there. And
Tell us about Austin's. I mean, like it was.
well, it was kind of kind of a greasy spoon barbecue place,
Okay.
but it just they had car hops. They had the car
Yep.
hops in the little drive-in area. And one of my friends, Lon Oakley, he said, he and his friends used to just go up there. And they only had enough money to buy one large iced tea, but they would
Just to hang out.
to hang out and watch the girls.
That's awesome.
funny.
Yeah, but there was a lot happening. That's where Stevie Ray lived really close.
Yeah,
to
he was
there.
right over there?
He was,
Okay.
yeah, and they built the Austin's was there. My understanding is they called it the off campus city council chambers of Oak Cliff that everybody all the politicians hung
They
out
all
there.
So there's
there.
some wheeling and dealing going on
Well,
there.
There
and
definitely
I
was,
heard
yeah.
even going back to that
Interesting.
JFK, like Tippett would be there. Or
He,
like
he worked there.
He worked there.
He worked
That's
there.
what it
He
was.
was an
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
during his off-duty hours. He was
Yeah.
a security officer.
There we go.
This is one of those
At
legendary
Austin's.
places.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And then right across the catty corner, well, there the library was there. That was a big
Okay.
deal because you could go up. Your parents would let you out to
Yeah.
go to the library.
Library,
You know.
yeah.
I'm going to the
It's a
library.
library.
Okay,
Goodbye.
fine, that works.
So you could go up there and you go to the library, and there was some, your friends were usually
Yeah.
up there and whatever.
Yeah.
And then on the other corner, when they built the Jack in the Box, that
Yeah.
was one of the first. I didn't even know there was a Jack in the Box. And they built a Jack in the
old
Box
one,
there,
yeah.
and everybody was there. One of my friends said, "I met my first husband in the drive-thru with the Jack in the Box."
How romantic. I love
That's
it.
legendary.
It was, yeah. And then there was a record store on the other corner, but yeah, that was kind of the epicenter there. And of
Wow.
course,
Okay.
the kids would drive their cars.
Yeah.
The drag was up and
Oh,
down Hampton
yeah.
Road,
Yeah.
and then of course going into Keys Park,
Yeah.
and you would go to Keys Park on Sundays, and there was it was an open circle then, and you just drive around Keys
around.
Park with your friends and see who's there, and
Yeah.
it was just Sundays at Keys Park. You know,
Yeah.
all the high school kids were just driving their cars around, and then at nights on the weekends they were dragging up and down.
Oh my.
Sometimes on Westmoreland, but a lot of times on Hampton
I think
Road.
they still do drag up and down the Hampton.
They probably do. I'm not
Some
over
things
there.
never change.
Things don't change. Oh, I do. Yeah, I've heard just nothing but absolute legendary stuff from Austin's. It seems like that was a center point over there.
Yeah, Big Daddy
Yeah.
Austin.
There you go.
Yeah, he ran the place. Everybody knew him. And
Big Daddy Austin was the guy.
that was his
Okay,
name. Yeah,
okay.
and they had little. They had a jukebox, and they had the little individual jukeboxes in the booths, and
Oh,
you'd put your
wow.
nickel in, and you could pick your song. And
I love it.
Yeah.
Oh,
and they
man.
had greasy French fries that were wonderful.
That's awesome.
And chopped barbecue beef, and yeah,
Making me hungry. That
with the
sounds
big,
pretty
the big
good.
peppers on the side
oh.
and everything. It's really nice.
I
That's
love it.
awesome.
We'll
But
get-
well, of course, El Phoenix
Yeah.
on Colorado. I mean, that was just iconic.
Yeah.
And I do understand why they had to tear it down. It was built in 47, I believe,
Yeah.
or 46, and of course, it just wasn't. It wasn't built to take all of the air conditioning and all the new electronics and everything. But I'm just sad they didn't just rebuild.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, we've
Yeah.
been seeing so many of those projects here in Oak Cliff where thankfully there's some good developers that are stepping up and saying, hey, let's keep that building. Let's
Keep what's here.
reuse it.
Yeah.
I mean, we love this building, this Tyler Station factory
Yeah.
building is an example of that in some ways. But you just hope that keeps happening because we don't want to lose these good old
Of
buildings.
course, Red Brian's Barbecue. That
Okay.
was, that
Well,
was
tell
right
us
across
about
from
that.
Sears. I think it's called El Ranchero now or
Oh,
something.
El Ranchito.
Oh, yeah. That was a
Yeah.
Dillbeck property,
yes,
wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah, okay.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, it was Red Brian's
Yeah.
Barbecue, and it was.
Wow.
I remember that they had sawdust on the floor. I mean, they had a concrete floor,
Yeah.
but they would put sawdust.
Sawdust
I'm not
down.
sure exactly why, but they the place was musty.
Yeah.
But and they had the taxidermy heads,
Yeah.
heads, the
On the wall.
the longhorns
Yeah,
and the buffalo
yeah,
and everything.
yeah.
And I remember you would go in there, and as a kid, they would take a cigarette and stick it in the.
In the mouth of the taxidermy.
That's hilarious.
That's great.
Well,
we do love El Ranchito, too. Shout out to them.
Yeah, shout out Elvis Night.
Oh, man, those are
speaking
good
of
times.
this time period, Elvis, he came to Oak Cliff, right?
He did, but that was
a different area as well.
Well,
or
it was when Elvis was big. I probably was 11
Okay.
or something like
Okay.
that. So
Yeah.
I was still riding my bike, and
I just heard he went to Norma's, right? Like that's the. I think that's what I've seen, like a photo of him eating at Norma's.
There's
I'm
always
that's
like
so
some
interesting.
alleged, he did this, he did that when he visited here.
Yeah.
That'd be an interesting one to
yeah,
to
there
go back
there
and look at
there are
because
a
I
lot
don't
of
remember.
legends that
Yeah.
are not true.
What
Yeah.
What are some of those? I'm like so curious. Yeah.
Today's show is brought to you by Waxspace. Are you looking for a place in Oak Cliff to connect and meet other neighbors? Then Waxspace is the place for you. Come join the Neighborhood Work Club, and for just $80 a month, you can get all the things you need to be productive at work. Why work from home when you can work from a place with other neighbors? We've got cold brew, fresh coffee all day, phone booths for your meetings. We've got a podcast studio and a lot of other amenities here. So visit thewaxspace.com to learn more and sign up today.
Well, the one that stands out to me would be in Fort Worth, so you guys probably wouldn't be.
Okay.
It was about Bonnie and Clyde. There's the Bonnie and Clyde suite at the Stockyards Hotel.
Oh.
And here's anybody that knows Bonnie and Clyde, especially Clyde. He was not going to get more than 15 feet away from his car.
Yeah.
Period.
Yeah.
It just wasn't going to happen.
Okay.
And so the thought that he would go inside of a hotel up on the second or third floor or whatever and not be, unless he had a rope already out the window and his car was on the curb or something. So there are you hear a lot of.
I imagine writing stories, you interact with a lot of those, and you have to sort through kind of what's actually true here and what's not.
What's the lore?
Yeah.
And what's not?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Well, Gayla, thank you so much for coming on the show. And please come back and tell us
we
more
got-
stories if you
yes,
will.
yeah.
But I want to just tell people a little bit about the book. So Legendary Locals of Oak Cliff is a great book that you can purchase, as well as Images of America Oak Cliff. And I imagine you can kind of find these anywhere you can buy books, Amazon, anywhere you would point people in general.
You can buy them directly from the publisher. You can contact Alan, Patsy, or me, and we have books. You can, some of the small, in Bishop Arts, a lot of the stores used to carry them. I haven't been down there and gone into any of the stores lately, so I don't really know if they're still doing that or not.
Books or Wild
Yeah, I
Detectives
would guess that you
probably.
could definitely find copies of these books over there.
What's surprising about the Oak Cliff book, the original one, is we don't know exactly at this point, but that book, to be a history of just a small little pocket of Dallas, has sold an amazing number of copies.
I believe it.
It really has.
There's a lot of pride in this neighborhood.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the people even the people that have moved away, they still remember all this. And a lot of them tell me they just get the book out and they just enjoy sitting down and going through it and looking at the photos and learning about all the people. And because, Oak Cliff had some amazing people that came out of here. And a lot of them were not from affluent situations.
Yeah,
and they went on to do fantastic things.
Well, on that note, Stevie Ray, we didn't jump into him yet, but can you tell us a little bit more of him and kind of even that? You said he grew up over by Illinois over here. And
yeah, he grew up just off of Hampton, Illinois on Glenfield.
Okay.
And he went to Lenora Kirk Hall Elementary School, and then he went to Stockard, and then he came to Kimball. Now, he didn't graduate because he left he left during Christmas break of his senior year. He just
Didn't finish
was
his
out.
second
He was done.
semester.
he was like, I'm done. I'm out of here. So anyway, Stevie was a student. I went to Kimball and graduated from there, and then I went back, oddly enough, and did my student teaching there. And then I taught there for 3 years.
Oh, nice.
I didn't have Stevie in class, but I had a lot of his buddies in class.
Yeah.
So I didn't have him, but he left, and of course started going to Austin and touring and all those kind of things, and of course just what an amazing guy.
Just one of the best guitarists to ever live is what they say.
Yes,
So,
he's on. If you go into Rolling Stone and some of the people that rank these guitar players, he's right up there at the top.
and it came out of Oak Cliff. So
He
you're saying though, he was just an amazing person.
He was, and the one thing that I think that has struck me about Stevie, and of knowing the people that he knew, reading about him. I was in the documentary that Kirby Warnock did. The Vaughan brothers. Nobody had anything negative to say about Stevie. I think even when he was in his depths of addiction and all that he was just a nice guy.
Yeah.
And you don't hear that about much of anybody.
No, you don't. No, that's amazing.
And I know that I think one thing that Oak Cliff can really be proud of, when Stevie finished rehab, I believe he was in Georgia. I think that's where he was. He moved back to Oak Cliff in his house with his mama. on Glenfield.
So I'm right about that.
And the
Yeah.
and the neighbors said that he would go out and mow the yard in his bolero hat and his boots, out there. And then when he got on his feet, and of course he was really doing well anyway. He had an apartment, I believe in New York, but he had one here too. Now it was not in Oak Cliff, but at that time Oak Cliff didn't really offer an apartment situation that would be secure enough for somebody that would have, he needed someplace that had some security and everything. So he was somewhere on the other side of Dallas. But I thought it was interesting and very comforting that he came back here.
He came home and kept a connection to home.
He did.
Yeah.
And like I said, everybody liked him, and
Awesome.
An amazing person.
We got to watch that documentary. Gayla, thank you so much for the time.
Well,
like Grant was
course.
saying, more stories. We got to come back.
Yeah, please
at some
do.
point.
If you will. But,
So
thanks again for coming on the show.
excellent. I enjoyed meeting everyone. Thank you.
Yeah.
And let's hear it for Oak Cliff.
there
Let's
we
go.
There we go. Hey, thanks for tuning in to this episode of The Hidden City. We hope you discovered something about Oak Cliff that you didn't know. If you enjoyed the show, I hope you subscribe to it on YouTube and then follow us on any of the podcasting platforms. Also, if you enjoyed it, please share with a friend. And thanks so much for tuning in.